wellness and spirituality at the Mental Health Association in New Jersey. As you know, with the leadership forum, we spend the first half hour in a learning opportunity, and we also integrate some Q&A in that 30-minute window. And then we invite you to report out what you're doing around the country. So I'm going to turn it over to Laverne in a moment, moderate the Q&A, and then I will invite Robert Strachey, our chair, to help lead us in the report out. I'm actually in Mississippi doing a mental health first aid training, so I stepped out just for this webinar. So I'd like to invite you to engage, learn from Laverne Williams. So welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay. So we're going to deal a little bit with faith and mental health. Oh my goodness. Hi guys. All right. The Pews program started in about 2005. But what I like to get across is that the integration of religion and psychology really started in the 1930s with Norman Vincent Peale and Smiley Blanton, who was an MD, and together they formed the Blanton Peale Institute. Don't know if you heard of them, but that's who really sort of kicked this all in the 30s. We're finding that a lot of folks would like to talk to a psychologist, social worker, or psychiatrist, but oftentimes persons want to go to their faith community to discuss their problems with their clergy person. And because psychology is not a very large part of the seminary curriculum, I have sat in churches most of my life listening to clergy who are uninformed, really mess people up from the pulpit. And I wanted to be able to do something about that. So what happened, I looked around. I didn't see anything with a face that looked like mine. I said, okay. If I go to my community, we want to be able to identify. So luckily at that point, it was called back then, the Division of Health and Hospitals heard about what we wanted to do, and they gave us a mini grant. And with the mini grant, we produced a video entitled Anything But Crazy, African American Spirituality and Emotional Wellness. And with that, I'm dating myself, but I don't know who's on the line, but if anybody remembers the Fuller Brush Company, was a salesperson who would go door to door with a suitcase full of household wares that you could sell. Well, I took hand to hand, door to door to the faith community who wanted to hear the message. I took the video and developed a PowerPoint, and that's pretty much how Pews got started. So I want to thank the Mental Health Association in New Jersey, because if it wasn't for them, I would not have had that opportunity. But again, sitting in churches all my life, I just know that I tell folks every time somebody rushes to the altar, they don't have the Holy Ghost. So we need to keep that clear and make sure people recognize that there's something else going on. And when we have the nurses auxiliaries, well, it's very nice to have your little white hat on and your little handkerchief and a box of tissues and a cup of water. But if somebody's hearing voices, that's not helpful. Or if you're from the Baptist faith, we like to hug. We like to hug our folks. And oftentimes when persons are in crisis, that's the last thing they need for you to be close to them. So to me, educating persons in our faith communities about health and wellness or mental health issues, persons who are having challenges, it's really crucial, because oftentimes when I've heard clergy say, well, come to the altar, or fast and pray, or let me lay some hands on you, or let me you should read your Bible more, that's not always helpful to someone. And so my thought was, if clergy were more educated, they would be able to help their congregants, and even also to maybe move them along to a service provider who, when they cannot, reach that person, that they would send them off to what services are in the area. When I go out and do the Pews presentations for a lot of the congregations, the questions always come up. So I like to explain to them about delusions, hallucinations, paranoid thinking, sleep disturbance, and just let them know these are what some of the emotional difficulties a person can be saddled with. Loss of interest in activities, undue worry and anxiety. Those are the things that come up. So I explain that what some of these difficulties are. And I also like to do a true and false question because that gets people to talking. It's not about Laverne Williams doing the lectures per se. And so when I asked about mental illness, I explained to them that mental illness is a term that collectively reflects a lot of other illnesses. And it's conditions that are characterized by the way you think, by the way your mood is, and by your behavior. So, I also explained that mental illness can be caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, maybe situational factors, such as a traumatic event, or an event like war, or even child abuse, and it could be a combination of both. And mental illnesses can also range from mild to severe, and it can change from time to time. So I like to tell folks that mental illness can be like a pendulum, swinging either way, depending. Some days you're right in the middle, some days you're not so well, some days you're doing much better. But it fluctuates over time. And then we start talking about what are some of the signs and symptoms of emotional difficulties. So there will be delusions, and I explained about hallucinations and paranoid thinking. Perhaps people are having a sleep disturbance, or they're having mood swings, or an appetite change, or suicidal thoughts, or loss of interest in activities. So we go through a lot of this information so that people can understand some of the terminologies that they've heard, but maybe no one has sat down to explain that to them. So I asked, the question is, true or false, and I will have them raise their hands, either way. The vast majority of people with mental illness are violent, true or false. So I'll give them a minute to think about that, and they just raise their hand true, they think it's false. And what I will ask them to do is, if you think it's true or false, you need to explain to me why you think that. What have you heard? And I get some very interesting answers. But when I explain to them that persons who are having emotional challenges are 2 to 3 times more likely to be victims of violence because of their illness, that turns on the light bulb. Because unfortunately, oftentimes, the only connection people have had with someone who's had some emotional challenges is what they see on the news, which is very exaggerated, or the most heinous crime somebody can commit, and then, the first thing they'll say is mental illness. So that's often why people are afraid, and I, let them know you are afraid of what you don't understand. When I think about the HIV and AIDS epidemic, which was not so long ago, people were not going to people's funerals, they were not going to their, to visit them in hospitals, and they certainly wasn't going to give them a hug. So to me, education, people are afraid of what they didn't know about. So if we start educating more about mental illness, and I absolutely like to say emotional challenges because it's a little softer. When I first was doing this, I would say, come learn about mental illness, and I would be in church basements, with the church punch by myself, waiting for people to come. And that's when the Pew's name started to grow on me, when that came to fruition. And then when you say emotional challenges, it's a little softer sometimes than saying mental illness. So I noticed that people started to come out based on what you're talking about. And then, depending on where I am, I may ask, are communities of color more likely to experience mental illness as a physical symptom? True or false? Again, I have varying different answers. Sometimes people say, well, yes. Some people say no. Some people say, well, I'm not sure. Or I know communities other than communities of color will go for counseling. And the bottom line is, okay, first of all, somatization, it's going to come out somewhere else. So if you are not taking care of your body, for example, you may have a lot of acne because you may be eating not the right foods, or if you're not taking care of an issue like your mind, it can come out with a backache, a headache. And so I asked, do you know a family member? Do you know of anyone, a friend, neighbor, who's been going to the doctor for X amount of years with a pain that the doctor cannot explain? People start to nod. I said, well, it could be something else going on, and they're not addressing it, because oftentimes when people go to their physician, they talk about other issues other than their mind. So I'll make that pretty clear. And then I asked, another true or false question. There is a higher suicide rate among older adults than young adults, and that's very interesting. The responses I receive are just all over the map. And the answer to that, bottom line, is that when they get the information back, suicide can be very common in older adults than in the other age group, and that actually 15% of severely depressed individuals end up committing suicide. So that's just very eye-opener there. But I always stress the point that severely depressed, not just depressed because everyone gets depressed from time to time. But the fact of this is that any attempt of talking about suicide should be taken seriously. And particularly when I'm talking about older adults, why are some of the reasons why they feel the way they feel? It's because they could have medical and physical problems. They have loss of loved ones. Children have moved away and they have less contact. They have changing roles in terms of they now become the child, or they're feeling less productive. Maybe they're retired now, they're not as busy as they used to, or they're on a fixed income and not used to really just having just that amount of money, unable to do the things that they used to do. So these are a lot of the reasons why persons, particularly our seniors, can feel depressed. I always get this question: what is the difference between depression and the blues? Well, when I explained that depression is an illness, whereas the blues could be a normal reaction to something that's happening with your life. Whereas depression, you probably will have multiple symptoms and it's something that will probably persist. Whereas with the blues, you have singular symptoms and it's only temporary, more than likely. With depression, it could be possible suicide, suicidal thoughts, and you would probably need specific medication and/or psychiatric treatment. Whereas when it's the blues, suicidal thoughts are rare. Sometimes you just need a good listener, and sometimes you just need time to heal. All right, so after going through some of these issues and just talking about some of the language people have heard and what that means, then I asked barriers to treatment. I like to ask folks, well, why would someone not go for treatment? And of course, I have various answers. Most of the time, people do pretty well on that question. But some of the signs are because of, some of the reasons are denial. People are embarrassed or ashamed. People don't want or refuse help. It could be lack of money and insurance. It could be fear of the problem. Believe it or not, oftentimes when I've reached out to faith communities and asked if they would like to have a Pews presentation, they say no, which is okay because there's enough churches in my lifetime here, just in Essex County, if I had to do them in Essex or Union County, that would keep me busy. But I often wonder, if you're not really want to inform yourself, how can you inform your congregants? But anyway, some folks still think that if I go see a psychiatrist, they're going to put me in a white jacket and lock me up. So again, just spreading that message that mental illness is a disease, it's a dis-ease with the mind. And again, we don't tell folks who have cancer not to take chemotherapy. We don't tell, we rush to take an aspirin as soon as our head hurts. And so why not get something for your mind to treat that, so just like you would treat any other disease. Other reasons why people refuse or will not go for treatment because symptoms are often masked with substance abuse. So we're talking about people who are dually diagnosed. They have a mental illness. They may have a drug and or drinking problem. So oftentimes people, some of the questions I get towards that end is, well, if someone has a mental illness and if they have a substance abuse problem, how do we treat that? My answer to that is you treat whichever is presenting the most issue. So if it's, sometimes getting someone to give up alcohol, you may want to work on their mental health first, or vice versa. It depends on what's presenting the most problem. And then how I got into this, I know that the reason why people will not go for professional treatment is because they do rely on their religious community to help deal with their emotional problems. And as I said earlier, because I know clergy, that psychology is a very small part of the seminary curriculum. I've often, as I said, heard people get very hurt and get frustrated and get the wrong information from the clergy person. Okay. Another issue about seeking treatment is people have resistance because it seems like they are not being loyal to their family members, particularly in communities of color. I know that some of the things I would, some of what people say to me is, well, you know what? My mother never had to go, and she raised 8 children. Or, you know, we need to just man up, you know, particularly communities of color. So, you know, we got through slavery. We can get through anything. Well, you know what? I'm a big proponent of if God made someone out there to help you, and you have no problem running to different doctors, then again, why not go get your mind checked? Another huge one, they will say, you know what, I have a great family, I have great friends, I don't need to talk to a professional. And my answer to that is, you can look at your girlfriend or your girl or your boy and they all messed up, but yet you're gonna listen to them? So then usually they'll laugh because they know it's the truth. And then I also get why people are not going for treatment. They'll say to me, well, even if I go, all they're gonna do is just give me some pills to take. And when I let them know that statistics show that you don't finish your medication, you don't take it long enough for it to work, so you might as well go and get the meds to help you out. They think about it. Most of the time they laugh because what I say is, normally I say things of what people think, but I'll be the one who will say it. So then oftentimes we'll talk about depression. And again, it really depends on which faith community reaches out to me, whatever problem could be presenting. For example, some faith communities have a larger youth population, or it may have a larger senior population, or it may have a lot of single parent population. So it really depends on what they want as to how I tailor the presentation for them. But most of what I'm going through today is what I do cover for just about everyone, and then I just go into whatever their specific issue that they contacted me about. How am I doing for time here? All right, got about 10 more minutes. So we covered what is depression. We've covered bipolar disorder. And then usually once I do the different disorders, we cover schizophrenia, talk a little about how schizophrenia is usually can attack 5 of the senses: taste, touch, sight, sound, and or smell. Usually not all 5 of them at one time, but it could be 1 or 2 of those issues that are being challenged. And we just talk about what that looks like. And we talk about a little bit about how persons who hear voices, what that looks like. Cover anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, and I then show the video. My video is Anything But Crazy: African American Spirituality and Emotional Wellness, and deals with persons who have been hurt and or helped by their faith community in their journey to wellness. So that, depending on where I am, the video is 28 minutes, but I have cut it down to maybe 11 minutes for some audience, depending on how much time that I have. And I like to make it very clear that mental health and faith communities should be working together. You know, they shouldn't be competing with each other for people to find wellness. Clergy should recognize some signs and symptoms, and but also mental health service providers should also maybe hear some of the teachings that clergy will do, and why and how people believe what they believe based on their faith. Based on their faith. And so, pretty much, that is it. For me, I think I've covered a lot of information, hope not too quickly, and I hope you got something from it, but this is a very good way to just get those folks who maybe, whether it's the nurses auxiliary, it could be the Sunday school teachers, it could be the deacon ministries, or any health and wellness ministry in the church to think about learning more about mental health. And this is quite palatable because it usually takes about an hour. So again, this is most of the presentation, and I think I'm done.
Well, thank you, Laverne. Can you tell us how many churches in the New Jersey area that you have presented the Fuse program to?
Off the top, probably about 100.
And I know some of those were African American churches.
Yes. So I did a couple of synagogues and also, Presbyterian. It really depends. It really depends who gets the call, who gets the information. So, we reach out to everybody. It doesn't matter. But it started in the African American community, but I was obviously much broader than that.
And I know the program initially was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation also, was a portion of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you also had a write-up that was done on the program also. Where can people find that information? They go to the New Jersey Association to get that information?
Well, they can, we just have they can actually write me. I have some manuals here, and we'll see. So they can write me at L. Williams at mhanj.org. I'll say it again, L. Williams at mhanj.org.
Great. Well, we Pathways for Promise decided about partnering with the Mental Health Association of New Jersey to bring companionship over to New Jersey in the near future. So we are really excited about that opportunity and the